everybody for coming. Unlike Greg, we're going to sit down because Patrick has 2 young kids, so he's very tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just going to go down to his level. Yeah, so I really appreciate everybody coming. I know a lot of people came in from the country or had better things to do than to learn about psychology, but happy you're here. So this project sort of came around. I have this music project where I write music about educational topics. So I've written songs about, it started with the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and then I wrote songs about copyright law and Canadian history and Jewish holidays. And recently the topic that's interested me has been psychology. And then I wrote so many of these songs about psychology that I decided to put it as an album and release it, play it here. Patrick, who's playing with me, he was the one who recorded the album. He's a sound engineer and a producer in Montreal. He used to be a guitarist for a French-Canadian band called Mary May. Performed at the Bell Center 5 times. 8 times.
It's okay.
So for me, this is like a big show. Like usually, like the times I perform, it's been like a house concert or at a bar. But for him, it's a very small show.
There's no small show.
All right, so I'll get started playing you guys some music. So the first song that I'm going to play is called Skull Size. So I got the idea for this song reading my Intro to Psychology textbook. There was a chapter on intelligence, and one of the things people became curious about early on is if there was a link between the size of someone's head and how smart they are. So they did studies where they measured someone's head, and they also had them write IQ tests, and they looked at what the correlation between those variables were. And ultimately, the correlation was very small. It was like 0.15, which is like almost an inconsequential correlation. And then with more technology, with MRI machines, they were able to actually look at the exact size of someone's brain, because there's more inside your head than just your brain. So the head size was a poor proxy for your brain. And so when they correlated the size of people's brain and their intelligence, the correlation was a bit higher, about 0.4, which is still just a moderate correlation in statistics. And within that, obviously, when a correlation is so moderate, there's often a lot of exceptions to the rule. One of those was Albert Einstein. He donated his brain to science after he passed away. And the average size of a male's brain is 2.9 pounds, but Einstein's brain was 2.7 pounds, so actually 0.2 pounds smaller than the average brain. Anyways. Einstein, they found, was less than 3. Barbie doll. You're gonna find out when I measure your skull. 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 So the next song that I'm going to play, it's called Carol Dweck Serenade. Carol Dweck is a professor of psychology at Stanford University in California, and she's done some really really research that's become quite famous, written a bunch of books. One of the studies that she did is she became very interested on the impact that praise has on children. So she did this study where she had a group of 5th graders, and she divided them into two, and the two groups were about of equal intelligence. So one group, she said, wow, you guys got 8 out of 10 out of this test. You must be really smart. And the other group, she said, wow, you got an 8 out of 10 on this test. You must have worked really hard. And then she measured over time how those two groups performed. So the first thing she noticed was that the group that were told that they were really smart, they were less willing to take on hard problems. When they were given the choice, do you want to do an easy problem or a hard problem? The people who were told that they were smart chose an easy problem, and the people who were told that they work hard chose a hard problem. And her theory was that when someone links their performance, like the fact that they did well, to their intelligence, all of a sudden they feel that they have this status of being smart, and it's now something that they could lose if they don't perform well. So now if they do poorly on a test, or if they're exposed by not solving a hard problem, people won't think they're smart anymore. So eventually she measured how the two groups did, and the group who were told that they were smart, their performance on the original test declined by 20%, and the group that were told that they worked hard, their performance actually increased by 30%. So it ended up being a 50% difference in performance that was just caused by a couple words of praise. Like, pretty interesting research. And I have to say that I give credit to my brother. He must have listened to the album, because last weekend I was at the country house, and his son, my nephew Hudson, solved a puzzle, I guess, that my brother struggled with at the same age. And my brother said to him, well, you must have been able to do that because you worked really hard. Don't tell me that I'm clever, that won't do me any good. Tell me I'm hardworking, if I'm working like I should. Cause if you call me clever, I'll start to be afraid of taking on a challenge or making a mistake. And I've seen lives fall apart from words like you're so smart. Take a group of people and tell them that they're smart. And take another group and tell them they work hard. Guess which group of people will go on to succeed? It's not the group of people that many folks believe. And I've seen lives fall apart from words like you're so smart. That's the theory of Carol Dweck. To cultivate a growth mindset, trust you're more than your DNA, and then growth will come your way. Don't tell me that I'm clever, that won't do me any good. Tell me I'm hardworking, if I'm working like I should. I need an open spirit, not inflated self-esteem. Eventually I'll find out about the truth of how I sing. And I've seen life so smart. From words like you're so smart. All right, so this next song, it's called Phineas Gage. A lot of intro to psychology courses start with the story of this guy, Phineas Gage. He worked on the railroad in the 1840s. So in 1848, he was laying down track by using explosives to pave the way for new track. And accidentally, he ignited the dynamite too soon, and the tamping iron that he was used to pack down explosives went through his head. So in one part of his head and out the other side of his head. It was a 3-foot rod, and it landed like 80 feet away. But miraculously, he was okay. And he actually continued working for a bit that day before actually seeing a doctor. And the reason he was so important in psychology is because this story sort of helped settle some debates about the brain at the time. So there were certain people who thought every part of the brain did the exact same thing. So the front of the brain and the back of the brain and the side of the brain, they were all the same. They were called whole brainers. And then there were people who thought that there might be specialization in the brain. And so with Phineas Gage, the thing with him is after his accident, a lot of his mental capacity stayed the same. So his memory was largely the same, and his cognitive skills were pretty much the same, but his personality changed drastically. Whereas before he was sort of a meek, mild person who was just a very good, very serious worker. After that, he became like he was swearing a lot. He became very impulsive, profane, and people said, Gage is not Gage anymore. That's what they said about him. Which actually, in hindsight, something. But so it showed. So people thought, because the rod went through the left frontal lobe of his brain, that probably the left frontal lobe of the brain was specifically involved in personality and things of that nature, but maybe not as much in other things like his memory and cognitive skills. So that's why a lot of psych courses start off with the story of Phineas Gage.
It is.
I'm Phineas Gage. I got a big hole in the side of my brain. Changed how I behave. You could find a hole in my left frontal lobe. Learn about the brain without having to probe. If you have a stroke or a rod in your brain, you can help us map the charts. People used to think that the brain was all one. Now we know there's different parts. September 13th, 1848, blasting through rocks. I was young and feeling great. I turned my head around to hear what someone said. The fuse went off, and the rod went through my head. People say that Gage is not Gage anymore. Ever since the rod in my brain, I used to be polite and socially skilled. Now I'm just rude and profane. A part of my story people don't know is how I bounce back. Got a job in Valparaiso, a stagecoach driver. Don't undersell, it's a complex job that I managed to do quite well. I heard a couple rumors I'm a circus freak. The truth is that I mostly bounced back. I didn't get to work for the railroad again, but traveled on a different track. I'm big hole, I got a big hole inside my brain, and it changed how I behave. So the next song is also kind of like a brain-based song about the nuts and bolts of how the brain works. So the song is called Neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are, what we know about the brain is, for most people, consists of roughly 100 billion neurons. Neurons are the individual cells in the brain. And neurotransmitters are the things that help the individual cells communicate between each other. So some of the neurotransmitters that people generally know about are serotonin. If anybody here takes an antidepressant, it's generally called like an SSRI, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So it kind of keeps the serotonin in between the neurons longer. There is oxytocin, which is important for bonding and love. They say if you stare into your dog's eyes for an extended period of time, on average, your oxytocin levels will go up by 20 to 30%. And another one is dopamine, which is largely involved in motivation and reward behavior. They say that people with schizophrenia often have too much dopamine, especially on the D2 receptor. And people who have ADHD often have a deficit of dopamine, which when they take Ritalin or something like that, it stimulates the dopamine. And also for people who have schizophrenia who want to reduce the dopamine, that's how antipsychotics generally work. Yeah.
That's true.
So if any of you guys are on antipsychotics, well, listen to the tune of O Susanna, public domain song. Said that serotonin was deficient in my brain, and if I take one little pill, then I'll start feeling sane. One antidepressant every day when I get up, I only got the side effects. Well, isn't that my luck? Oh, serotonin, I'm trying to get some rest. Got my fix from Sickle X, so why am I depressed? There's 100 billion neurons, plus or minus in my head. Neurotransmitters help to translate what they said. Glutamate makes you nervous, endorphins make you smile. Oxytocin's there for love and making life worthwhile. Oh, serotonin, I'm trying to get some rest. I got my fix from Sickle X, so why am I depressed? Say that schizophrenics produce too much dopamine, and if you've got too little, you got ADHD. Chester said I'm lacking, and I don't think that he's wrong, 'cause I still can't remember all the lyrics to this song. Oh, serotonin, I'm trying to get some rest. I got my fix from Sickle X, so why am I depressed? Everyone, serotonin, I'm trying to get some rest. I got my fix from Sickle X, so why am I depressed? Oh, serotonin, I'm trying to get some rest. I got my fix from Sickle X, so why am I depressed? Oh, serotonin, I'm trying to get some rest. I got my fix from Sickle X, so why am I depressed? My uncle, I wouldn't sing my Sigmund Freud song that has swearing, but I do have a Sigmund Freud song that doesn't have swearing, and it's hard to discuss the history of psychology without mentioning Freud. So Freud's big theory, one of his primary theories, was that All neurosis is developed in one of these 5 psychosexual stages that starts from birth, that goes up until adulthood. So the first stage is called the oral stage, is like when you're breastfeeding. The second stage is the anal stage, when you're being toilet trained. The third stage is the phallic stage, which is when you go through the Oedipular electric complex. The fourth stage is the sort of like an intermediary stage. And the fifth stage is the genital stage, which starts with puberty going up into adulthood. So his theory was that if you get stuck in one of these stages, that'll be what helps develop your neurosis. And it'll develop it in a very specific way that'll shape your personality into adulthood. So for instance, if someone is either weaned off from breastfeeding too soon or they're overindulged, they might develop what he would call an oral personality, which would be characterized by being like very passive, as if you're still waiting for your mother's breast to feed you. And most people know about the anal phase. People are very OCD, cleanly, or the opposite, which is more me. All right, so let's do this one. Started with an oral fixation. All started with your mother's breast. You're weaned off too late or too early, and you'll have some problems, as you might have guessed. Cause if you can't get over that oral phase, if you can't get over that phase, then you'll be dependent or overly passive, somebody else. The next phase is when you learn about your bowels. Do your business in a way that's clean. You need some structure, but not so overbearing, to give you some discipline without being mean. But if you can't get over that anal phase, if you can't get over that phase, then you'll be too messy or overly tidy, disorganized or OCD. Phallic stage of psychosexual development. Spot the difference between lock and key. You'll face the edible or electra complex. Identification is what sets you free. But if you can't get over that phallic stage, if you can't get over that stage, you'll be narcissistic and exhibitionist, a little bit like Donald Trump. Here's the bridge. Here's the bridge. The Lathan stage is the bridge. Sublimate your libido, make some friends. The final stage is when it all comes together. The genital stage begins with puberty. You move outside from your mother and your father, love and work to start a family. But if you can't get over that genital space, if you can't get over that phase, you'll have sad diversions and strange perversions, a bachelor for the rest of your days. That's the end. That's the end. Here we are at the end of the stages of psychosexual development. So I got the idea for the next song. I was reading the memoir of Carl Jung, who was one of Freud's greatest students. And in his memoir, he had a chapter on Freud. And he said how Freud said to him, like, Carl, take my sexual theory and make a dogma of it. But Carl Jung, he felt, based on his clinical experience, that not all neurosis has this psychosexual origin. He said, some of my patients, they just get messed up in all sorts of different ways, not just in this one very specific way.
Exactly.
And so Freud had a whole bunch of these students, and eventually most of them broke away from Freud, rejecting his sexual theory as all explaining of neurosis. So the three psychologists I'm going to talk about are Alfred Adler, who came up with the concept of the inferiority complex, Carl Jung, who developed the idea of the collective unconscious, and Viktor Frankl, who was, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. So his big belief was that to counteract neurosis, or to give you a good life, the most important thing is to find purpose and meaning in your life. He had been a prisoner in Auschwitz during the Holocaust, and he gave one anecdote that stood out to me, where he talked about how even on Yom Kippur, like, people made sure to keep track of the days, and they were still aware that it was Yom Kippur. And even though they only had like one tiny bowl of soup and a piece of bread that they were given every day in the concentration camp, like, a lot of the prisoners still passed up eating that day. He said a lot of those people were also the people who survived because they were driven by such a deep sense of purpose and meaning that carried them through. So, this song is called Freud's Disciples. There's gotta be more to life than sex. Not all my problems could be traced to my mother's breast. I'm Alfred Adler and I got the blues. To challenge Sigmund Freud, I've got so much to lose. But I know that life is power. You feel helpless when you're small. It's that complex which will drive you like a sick knuckleball until all your insecurities dictate how you play the game, and you cultivate an illness to have something else to blame. There's gotta be more to life than that. All my neurosis can't be only how I swing my bat. I'm Carl Jung and I've got the blues. To challenge Sigmund Freud, I've got so much to lose. 'Cause I'm more than just my problems. I've got yours and you've got mine. We're collectively unconscious how our destinies entwine. There's still wisdom in his writing. We're repressing our abuse, but his theories got too narrow, so I had to cut him loose. There's gotta be more to life than touch. I found life's meaning when I reached for the Lord above. I'm Viktor Frankl and I got the blues. To challenge Sigmund Freud, I've got so much to lose. But I know how much is damaged when we don't believe in love, because power gets corrupted. Also, pleasure's not enough. We must search for greater meaning. Man can't live on bread alone. I stayed faithful in starvation, and that's how I made it home. There's gotta be more to life than sex. next song I'm going to play is called Psychopath. I read a bunch of books about psychopaths by different psychiatrists who studied that area. So the way that a psychopath is now defined is a test created by a Canadian psychologist named Bob Hare. And he created this test that scored out of 40 points. And if you get over 30 points on this test, you're considered a psychopath. And when they've given this test out to the wide population, generally 1 out of 100 people are considered psychopaths. Certain groups of people are overrepresented in psychopaths. So like obviously, if you go to a jail, criminals are often a higher rate of being psychopaths, and also business leaders like CEOs, people working in finance, they find that those people are psychopaths at a rate of 5 to 6, 7%, depending on who you ask.
That's the good news.
And I guess the logic is that the same type of people might create crimes and not have any remorse or a conscience about that, are the same type of people who might package together some private bonds in collateralized derivatives and sell them.
Yeah.
Also, another thing about psychopaths is, I don't mean to bore you with too much theoretical discussion, but I need to make my research feel like it had a purpose. Psychopaths generally, they have the part of their brain that controls fear. It's called the amygdala. Is generally smaller, as well as what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that's involved in moral reasoning. And they also found that when they bring a psychopath into a lab and like threaten him with an electric shock, they measure his physiological responses. Most people get nervous, their heart rate would increase, they might start to sweat, stuff like that. Whereas a psychopath, their heart rate doesn't change because they feel no fear. So also, if there's 100 people at the show right now, generally statistically there'd be one psychopath. I think it's Hillel Greenbaum.
Thanks, Ryan.
1% of the human population is made up of psychopaths, of course. 1% of the human population would slit my throat without any remorse. I've got 2,000 friends on Facebook. 20 of them are legally insane. What if they're working from my office? What if they share my DNA? Examining the neurophysiology helps us to explain this complex. A psychopath's amygdala is smaller, with a pretty scary prefrontal cortex. The brain image showed it all so clearly, confirming what everybody knows. Lack of conscience helps them to gain power, and hired to work as CEOs. Put a psychopath in a laboratory, threaten him with an electric shock. A psychopath's heart rate will stay constant, in some cases even start to drop. I've got 2,000 friends on Facebook, 20 of them are legally insane. What if they're sitting in the Segal Center? What if they share my DNA? So this next song that I'm going to play, one of my friends told me not to play this song because it's a little bit negative towards psychiatrists. So there was a guy named David Rosenhan who did this experiment in the 1970s where he was very skeptical about psychiatric labels. He sort of thought that like a lot of psychiatric labels could be viewed like a lot of people view astrology. Like everyone could sort of feel like a Gemini, and everyone could sort of feel like a Taurus. So similarly, everyone like could feel a bit self-involved and identify with being a narcissist, and everyone could be kind of distracted and identify with having ADHD. So he did this study where he sent 10 different people to psychiatric hospitals. They were friends of his, supposedly normal people, that he sent to psychiatric hospitals throughout the country. And he told them to just say that they had auditory hallucinations, and that they heard voices. So all of them, except for one person, were diagnosed with schizophrenia. But then the second part, he told them, once you get in there, just act as normal as you possibly can and see like how long it takes you to get out of there. But some of them, they never got out. They're like Charlie on the MTA.
It's kind of crazy though.
And then the second part of his experiment is there was one hospital, they really took it personally that they were sort of being called out in this way. So they said, send us a bunch of patients and we'll identify the ones who are like fake patients, agents of yours. And so over the next couple months, they had 200 new patients, and they identified 43 of them as being fake patients that had no real problems. But in fact, Rosenhan didn't send anyone to the hospital. With that being said, and to my friend Allie, you know, there's obviously the majority of people who go into the medical profession go there with trying to help people and do good work.
Yeah.
But obviously there's also a lot of problems in psychiatry, a lot of subjectivity. And one thing that I did say in my book about psychopaths that I found a bit disturbing was they said, you know, right now we define a psychopath as someone who has over 30 out of 40 points on the Bob Hare psychopath checklist. We said if one day the drug companies ever came up with a medicine to treat psychopathy, that number would immediately go down to 20, because, you know, right now it's 1% of people, but the drug companies would want to treat, you know, 6 or 7% of the population, and they would inevitably get their way. Which is, I guess, sort of what's happened in the market with antidepressants and ADHD medication. So this one's called the Rosenhan experiment. The Rosenhan experiment showed how little we know about mental illness. And the psychiatric profession were shown to be particularly clueless. But we still give them money to dance, and we still give them chance after chance, and we're taking people's liberty away on pure speculation. Nurses and the orderlies were frequently emotionally abusive. They put you in restraints for saying something that they labeled as intrusive. And if they really cared about their job, all the dignity they rob. The Stanford prison experiment is lost. But what do we remember? Nobody in the study had any difficulty gaining an admission. When they acted normal, they still held them back against their volition. These doctors act as experts in our courts. Can't you see the pimples and the warts? The deals they make with Pfizer and with Roche is why we let it happen. The Rosenhan experiment showed how little we know about It's called Four Lobes. So hope you'll sing along to the chorus.
Yes.
And my mother will. And yeah, what we learned in Phineas Gage was that there's different parts of the brain that handle different things. So there's 4 lobes of the cerebral cortex, and I'm going to sing about them.
You ready?
Yeah. My frontal lobe is happy inside of my brain, helping to structure a verse and refrain, logic and planning, emotions aside. It's not fully formed until you're 25. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. I'm losing my mind, one lobe at a time, and I don't think I'll find it again. The occipital lobe I'm using to see the very kind audience who's listening to me. The back of the brain is where it resides, the left and right hemisphere spanning both sides. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. I'm losing my mind, one lobe at a time, and I don't think I'll find it again. The parietal lobe is not one to spare. For sensual people, they love it in there, integrating the senses of sight, smell, and touch, mathematics and reading. It handles so much. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. I'm losing my mind, one lobe at a time, and I don't think I'll find it again. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. I'm losing my mind, one lobe at a time, and I don't think I'll find it again. The temporal lobe I'm using to hear. You'll find the amygdala processing fear. My hippocampus won't let me forget the words and lyrics I sing in my set. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya. So long, it's been good to know ya.